THG Star Dragon Publishing presents Pearls of Sea and Stone, Book of Seals, a Selkies Skins story. Written by Teresa Garcia. Narrated by Illya Leonov. Part 3. Castle Carrick, December 8th. Kirsty grinned as she channeled the water energy from below the castle, bringing its shimmering essence up into her body and into a quivering ball in her heart. Her wand sang in anticipation, soft croons audible to the other students on either side of her. All around her she could smell and hear other students trying to gather their elemental energies. There was a pop and singing sound in the northwest corner, and the dark curl of burnt hair as one of the fire users lost control.
"Do not lose your concentration again."
The defense teacher's voice slid over her ear like silk. Half the students' attentions wavered. Kirsty's lip curled, and she concentrated on hardening the energy she had collected, and prepared for the next step, while the others started over. If this were an attack, almost everyone would already be dead or immobilized. Why couldn't the others just keep up? She chanced a glance around the room, letting the energy dance within herself, and beginning to feel like she was going to overflow. The only person that held as much as she did ready glowed a sickly green. Just as she was chancing a look, so was he, and when their eyes met, the energies threatened to tangle. Morvan smirked at her, his blue eyes shining with the green light, and his hair waving languidly. His lips moved, his whisper too soft for most to hear. Her sensitive ears, though, could pick it out. "Beast blood, I know what you are, whore spawn."
"That's better, much better. Now, face your opponents. Teresa Makay, I hear that the two of you are rather advanced. Go, watch how it's done."
The defense instructor strutted close, the better to watch the fireworks and oblivious to the baiting. "Professor Dunnigan, I don't think it's very wise to pit them against each other." Professor Severin's voice slid through, soft as a snake between the students, and crawled into their ears.
"Nonsense, Professor Severin. Why not pit two of my most advanced students against each other, since they both know shielding and attack so well?" He drew into Kirsty's range of vision. The mere sight of his pompous roundness and fluted cerulean and iris robes made her want to wash her eyes with a fresh batch of wart remover. His blonde pompadour clawing at the sky and twinkling blue eyes made her gorge rise. His cologne was a horrific dousing of dragon musk, and she suspected rain dragon by how most girls reacted. Jasmine, honey, pine, and citrus that threatened to implode her sinus cavities. "The two families have a rivalry older than the two of us put together have been alive, and both are very capable of killing the other if given a reason. I think that should be adequate reason." Severin's tone was acerbic, and would have dissolved anyone's optimism except Dunnigan's, even Kirsty's. "Ridiculous!"
Professor Dunnigan swept his arms wide, beaming at Morvan and Kirsty as he expanded his energy out and around them, in what Kirsty imagined a hug from a creepy rapist probably felt like, right before he kidnapped some poor lass from a pub.
"We have here two children of our current age that have no need of ancient shipping rivalries. Isn't that right, children?"
"Oh, indeed, sir, there is no question about rivalry here," Morvan agreed, smiling at Kirsty in exactly the same way he would when killing a toad to harvest its liver. "I only return what I'm given." Kirsty kept her tone even, The ball in her heart was tearing at its bounds, and she could see and feel the wave building. "I still would like to know how the board pushed this one on to us," she thought, her nostrils flaring as she exhaled. "There, see? We're all hearts and flowers here." Professor Donegan clapped his hands and flashed teeth that Kirsty was very certain were glowing. "We're something, but it isn't hearts and flowers." Professor Severin drawled and backed up an additional 7 paces, many of the students taking his lead. Some even tried to get other students in between themselves and the pair. "Begin!" Donegan's arm swept up dramatically as he spewed purple and blue sparks from the end of his wand, along with the dreaded hearts and flowers. Morvan released his element with a bang and sizzling flare, his shot spiraling toward her like the fizzy rocket the McDougall twins had set off earlier in the day and received detentions for. Kirsty released the water inside, letting it rush out her wand, while Marsali's hair sang a high note. Wordlessly she spread the water around herself in a bubble in case Morvan's attack split. The mirror she formed bounced the blast back, and she quickly folded it around his thrust and sent the water with the blow. It happened faster than Morvan could react, and then her waters engulfed him. He tried to wrest control of the energy he'd sent at her, but it had disengaged from his wand, or the vile wench was blocking him. He'd not thought that perhaps she would be quick enough and strong enough to overpower him. After all, Selkies were soft, weak creatures, more interested in dancing on beaches by moonlight and keeping him up with their wailing songs. Try as her family did to hide their despicable origins, and they concealed it well, his family knew the truth. The water was winning its way into his nose as it swirled around him, and flashes of midnight sea eyes invaded his mind, as the frigid waters stung his sinus cavities. Then it tore down his throat eagerly and battered at his epiglottis to win his lungs. The defense instructor was squealing like a pig being taken to the slaughter, but Kirsty could barely hear him. What was louder to her was the sound of Lilitu's heart pounding and slowing. Through the water she could taste the salts from his blood, as the water absorbed into his bloodstream through the lining of his lungs. Her blood burned and yearned for his with teeth, as strange a vision as it was. The water was no longer her own. Her wand had taken over. A consciousness far older than her own cried out for justice. She smiled widely, displaying her slightly pointed fish-eater's teeth. Another presence broke into the struggle. Her wand shrieked as the connection was severed, or perhaps the shriek came from her own throat. The water that hit the polished wood floor splashed back up before falling down again and spreading out around them. Kirsty trembled and finally felt her clenched fists where her nails had drawn blood that trickled down. Some had already mixed with the water during the course of the fight. She felt it, smelt it. Why was there as much water around herself as around him? Morvan lay face down on the ground, and Professor Severin was over him. A barked command and a thumping motion with his wand brought a wave of water pouring from the abnormally pale boy, as the room collectively gazed at her with dropped jaws. He repeated the gesture until the waves came no more, and breath returned. She examined her hands, while the whispers started. "And that, class, is why you should always be prepared to block immediately after having launched an attack." Professor Donegan attempted to salvage the situation. "Well, then, who's next, "No one," Professor Severin stated flatly, his hair straighter and darker than before. "I think they have all had more than enough of a shock." The door creaked open, Professor Guilman being revealed in his blue robes emblazoned with each of the house crests, topped by the school's crest. In his arms he held a cloth-wrapped package. At his elbow stood Professor McCloman, whose gasp echoed through the room. "Just what has happened here?" The headmaster adjusted his spectacles and then sighed when he saw which two students were at the center of the debacle.
Makay and Leonov were allowed to face off despite my counsel, professors.
Professor Severin helped to steady Leonov as he sat up, who sagged and coughed much more than he needed.
She tried to drown me, sir. She tried to drown me.
The boy's voice sounded more like a mouse on a loudspeaker than anything.
Kirsten Allegra Makay, is this true?
Professor McLoman somehow seemed to grow, every student and the defense instructor seeing her pointed hat scraping the towering cathedral ceiling, even though her actual size remained the same.
Yes, Professor, I think so. He lipped some nasty things at me about Mum, and then we were paired off, and I didn't want him to do it again.
Kirsty grimaced and held out her wand, her breath hitching. Ma Sally's hair, broken in twain, was one of the last things she ever wanted to see. Her wand still glowed with a flickering green and blue light at the end, sea fire, that refused to be extinguished.
I suppose I'm to be expelled?
Morvan smirked, and Professor Severin's scowl carved deeper chasms into his face.
I don't know yet. I'd like to examine all 6 sides of the story before deciding anything.
Professor Guerman overrode the start of Professor McLuhan's answer.
6?
Morvan gasped, the cough forgotten.
Why 6? Why, my boy, yours and Miss Makay's, your professors, and what your and Miss Makay's wands have to say about the incident. A pip-pip, up we go. Come see me in my office.
He flashed a smile to melt the ice in the room, which did little to counteract the chill from Professor McLoman and Severin's twin scowls, or the memory of what had just happened. Kirsty walked out the door, tracking water behind her and paying no attention to it. Everyone and everything around her felt as if she were encased in thick glass. As she passed up the corridors and stairs on the way to the headmaster's office, the paintings of a befreckled, auburn-haired girl astride a great black dragon paused in their loops above the trophy awarded to one Tabitha O'Drake to watch the procession. The girl cried out in an old Gaelic, asking what was wrong, but no one answered. The inquiry passed in a blur for Kirsty, the most memorable bit being when she was asked to stand before a large black mirror, beset around the edges with a myriad of faceted and cabochoned stones carved with arcane runes she hadn't learned yet. The whole thing reminded her vaguely of something that Thomas might try to make with his love of amulets and talismans. By the time she had removed her hand, she wished she'd never touched it in the first place. Reliving that span of time was something that was already going to be happening repeatedly for some time, if she was correct. Knowing that the heads had both not only seen, but felt everything exactly as she had, left her feeling as if she'd dropped her dress and revealed her undeniable mark to all. At last it came time to examine the wands stories, and she began to take in more of the sparkling office. The voice of Morvan's wand Bludwig was clipped and haughty, in a language that Kirsty did not know. The headmaster and headmistress seemed to understand its speech perfectly, though, giving harsh looks toward Morvan. Her own wand's voice was more familiar, though just as terse. She could imagine the way Marsally's upper lip tightened when angry, and the way her hands would be unable to hold her spindle in her painting. Marsally's, no, her wand Vervain's, report damned her just as much as that of Bludwig's had been for Morvan. She chanced to look at her aunt, then promptly wished she hadn't. Professor McLoman was paper white, and her eyes had gone clear, while her lips were merely a horizontal gash. In light of everything, Professor Guerman lightly rested a hand on Professor McLoman's elbow gently. I don't think that I shall expel either of you. It is far better for the both of you to learn to control your tempers, and I am not expecting either of you will have the conditions to do so outside this school. Part of the purpose is to learn to get along with others in this world." Morven widened his eyes and leaned forward. "Excuse me, you're allowing her to stay when she tried to kill me?" "You did bait her, by your own wand's admission, and you have been baiting her at least since you came under my tutelage. She has displayed remarkable self-control, so far only blowing up toilets on you thus far." There was none of the usual laughter in his voice. "You have not been representing your family, nor your community well, and you have a very long way to go in regaining your wand's respect, since it stopped working for you." "But—" Morven started. Professor McLoman overrode him. "I think that they should both have short-term in-house suspensions and detentions in addition, since you don't think it wise to expel them. I find nothing wrong with this plan. I can personally ensure that my student's suspension will be perfectly miserable while he learns and contemplates his lesson. Might I suggest that I be the one to handle their detentions, and not Professor Donegan?" Professor Severin sidled into the conversation, circling the students and eliciting a wince from the defense instructor with every step. Kirsty wished the floor would swallow her, and that one of the models suspended from the ceiling would smash her. Disappointing 3 of the professors that she respected and liked most was not something she ever thought possible to do in one fell swoop. If she were one of the troublemakers habitually, it could be easier to take, perhaps. Professor Severin held her gaze. The distance in his eyes was more pronounced, as if he were reliving some form of betrayal. Her eyes spilled, and she looked down, feeling a sting on her cheeks. "No, I can understand. Despite what you're thinking, I am still disappointed." The voice in her head was dead and flat, as if to even allow himself emotion in his own mind was death. Kirsty looked up again, beginning to open her mouth, but his look sharpened, so she closed it and held her exclamation. "I think nightly after dinner would be fair," Professor McLoman offered, "unless you have things that you must attend to during that hour." "None that would be interfered with. If all is arranged for now, then we will take our leave. I am most anxious to properly express to my student the depths of my disappointment." "We can confer later on as to how long this shall last," the headmaster nodded. "We have a few things of our own to discuss with Miss Makay." She watched as the others left, Professor Donegan scurrying out the door like a Pomeranian that had been punted, then slowly turned to look back at the school heads. They sat heavily at the chairs beside the headmaster's desk, where the parcel waited. "This is not what I intended to discuss with you, young lady." "No, sir, I'm sorry." "As you should be. I think you understand part of why you're here now, though, and not being home-schooled." "Yes, sir, sort of." The heads watched her in silence for a moment. "Kirsty, what am I going to do with you? Your parents are going to be devastated when I write them." Professor McLoman sighed, with a hitch in her voice. Her eyes held a suspicious sheen that Kirsty knew was her fault. "I don't know. I think it would be wise that you don't attend dueling any more while you're in the school. We'll find another way for you to have sufficient practice with self-defense." Her house's head's statement came slowly, as if she were ripping her own heart out with those words. Professor Guerman nodded. "I'll support you in your decision, Balara. We can make the same suggestion to Erebus, although I suspect he is already thinking along the same lines, for Mr. Lilitude." Kirsty looked down at her hands, still not sure how the murderous intent had washed over her. To feel that sort of rage for a Fenman was one thing, but a classmate? As much as he despised the blonde-haired, arrogant geet, she'd never thought herself capable of simply drowning him before. "For now, The headmaster's voice broke into her thoughts. "Oh, why don't you read to us some from this book? It seems that we can only see certain pages, and what your aunt sees is different from what I can read." Kirsty nodded, unwrapped the book, and began to read, letting her fingers drift over the fur. The Tale of Ma Sally. There are several versions currently extant of the tale of Ma Sally Maranian, of the Temple of the Ninth Wave. I will relate here that one that I know to be truest, as even among the Selkie folk there are debates as to the veracity of certain facts. The time of this is also in question, and though there is one alive that has seen parts, he does not ken time in the same way as others, instead wrecking by generations in the letter that was delivered to me. Given my checks only produced a letter, I cannot state whether or not this was a joke from some local of the area called Selkie Point. Once there was a Selkie lass, as fair a Maranian priestess as you had ever seen, as the temple-born usually are. Her sealskin was a rich, aged oak brown, such as can be seen in older taverns, once the rafters have seen a decade of smoke, or the abalone once it has been cooked for stew. Her hair, of her human form, matched this, and she was one that had so light a half-pelt that when nude and skinless would be taken for a human, save for her eyes, too large, too deep, to belong to a human woman who had never gazed on the secrets of the sea. As is common among those of the sea temples, Ma Sally Maranian was to be wed to one of the priests from the other temples to keep the ties strong during the days of fragmentation, when there were yet more temples. The hard part was finding a male that would accept her in a temple that needed resecuring. Ma Sally was not a cow that would be easily swayed, nor herded. Mara's independence shone through her. Thus it was that her parents were hard-pressed to find a male that could handle her, and handle not being the one to have final say. Thus it was that in desperation she was assigned a bodyguard for during these travels, ever since she was in her 5th year. The two were inseparable, and there were times that their honor was called into question, despite the difference in their specie. The pair traveled, Mara's wide net searching, Ma Sally turning her nose just as often as the young men that initially would court her with relish, until they proved they wanted her for her position and not herself. This continued on for many more years than it would today. The Kelpie that was her bodyguard eventually received word regarding deaths in his family, and he was needed in his home range to assist in seeding some of the mares to help offset the losses from the humans. Ma Sally wished to return to that coastline with him, but was already supposed to be visiting a nearby sub-temple, and so bade her friend a safe voyage, with the usual kiss upon his nose reserved for him alone, as her confidant and guard. While parted, she stayed the rest of her term at the Temple of the White Pearl, before making her way for the Temple of the Blushing Pearl, going between the territory of the Ninth Wave and the Northern Lights. There were sirens that had usurped power in between the temples, seeking to weaken Mara's net, and weaken her power in the seas, that their own goddess might claim supremacy. These delighted in tempting and then killing mariners, or of crushing their ships with storms. Such a storm had pulled a fisher's ship and its crew far off course, and Ma Sally heard the cries. In driving off these usurpers she became injured, and by the time she had stopped the storm it had claimed the ship and most of the crew, save for one man. Taking pity, for he revealed to her whilst believing she was one of those sirens, and so pleading for his life, that he had elderly parents and a village to feed, She kissed the lad, and so used her magic on him while drawing him below the waves. Taking him home took her off course, but to take him to a foreign land in those days would have ensured his death, for the language he used was not that of the closest landfall. By the time she had brought Darwin Mackay thither, he had thoroughly fallen in love with the lass, though she had performed her duty. During the time she held him and swam with him, she also had begun to develop more than the feelings of a rescuer, but she held back, knowing that she was promised to another. She was tired after the long swim and the prolific use of her magic to sustain him, and so he convinced her to spend one night in his home with himself and his parents. The next day, when she arose, her skin was gone, hidden away. Sally looked for it long and cried piteously, but she could not turn it out nowhere she sought. The days grew long into months, and she began to become wan for want of her parents and swimming the seas. The fisher courted her the best he could, and revealed to her his own secret. He produced for her flowers and the pretties that they do not have below the seas, transforming stones to delicate combs for her hair. The fish flocked to her presence, and he no longer had to fare so far after the shoals as he had before. Gradually she began to accept these advances, and was not long with child before Byron had fulfilled his duties and sought after her. First he attacked Darwin, intending to kill and eat in retribution, but spared the man on promises of returning the skin and setting Sally free to her duties. Darwin knew the stories of the Selkie folk well, though, and feared that if he restored her soul, that she would take their child still in the womb and return to the sea. Though he promised the skin, he never produced it, and Byron remained to help search out where it had been hidden. Darwin swore that it had been stolen from where he had hidden it, but the only other folk that had been in the home with them had been the parents, who were old and growing feeble. Those two had a certain affection for a well near by at the top of a hill, a very strange place for a well to be. In the course of time, the first of Sally's issue was pupped in the pool close to the point itself, where water came out of the cliff, and the fish was always plentiful. Other children came, and then grandpups, but no skin was ever found. Sally died an old silver hair, and no one knows where the body was laid to rest. To this day she still clings to the world, unable to move on without it. Her children tend both the well and Mara's bidding, as they always will. Kirsty looked up at them and bit her lip. Sally never told me his name, so that's new to me. Should I try to confirm that with her when I go home? Both heads nodded at her. Professor Guerman had conjured tea, and a plate of oatmeal biscuits and blairberry muffins, with sides of red slashberry preserves for spreading. He poured out and motioned to the food. Kirsty accepted slowly, with a sigh. Her world hadn't ended. They still seemed to like her enough to break bread with her. I think it would be wise to verify as much as you can. Have you been taking notes? Yes, sir. Good. Would you mind taking time to copy down everything you've read and will read? It might be wise in case parts disappear later. He took a bite of one of the biscuits, crumbs falling into his white beard. Professor Guerman brushed them away distractedly. Yes, sir. She gave him a quizzical look. Since when do words disappear from books? Continue on, Kirsten. Professor McLoman waved her wand, not letting her dwell. Yes, ma'am. Kirsty took another short drink, and then continued reading aloud. She only took short breaks between sections to nibble and sip, unless her voice began to give out. On Selkie skins. The skin of a selkie is highly important to the transformation process. There are methods where one with selkie blood can transform to seal, or in between, without the skin, but these are only temporary. Additionally, the soul of a selkie is bound to their skin. Thus why, when a selkie wife or selkie lass has her skin stolen, she must do as the thief asks, elsewise there may be no hope of gaining freedom once more. Bulls, whether mere lads or husbands, are not immune, and a cunning land wench might be able to secure herself a fine husband in this way, especially as tears lure them so well. But not all selkies have skins either. Some breeds of selkie remain waterbound all their lives, and have no need or desire to shed one to walk on land as humans. Others are born with them, yet others earn them. This is particularly true of those selkies of mixed blood who are born to a human parent. Of those skins, some come directly from Mara or her sister. Sometimes the skin comes from both. Each tribe is unique in how they gain those skins if they are not born with them. The more favored or the closer to the deity's blood at issue, the more difficult the procurement usually is. Those that are not high in the ranking may have one made or gifted. Those of the temple lineages or the clan chief lineages must earn them if they are not born with one. Elsewise they do not have the full standing, and some lines do not grant adulthood as a selkie without one. No selkie may partake in tribal or clan council without being in possession of their skin. If a skin is made, it must be from fur or wool of some sort. That fur is carded, spun, and woven or knit into the shape of the skin. Wool can be used, though this requires more spell work done on it by the selkie crafter. Brushed fur from a fellow seal, possibly related, is best. It is closest. This work must be done silently, the maker always holding on to or keeping about their person some aspect of the project, even when resting. After the physical part is made, there is a further spell that must be sung and worked over this, before it will serve to turn someone back and forth between the forms. It is these manufactured skins that are most easily traded or passed on. These are where the tales of the were-seals come from, related somewhat to selkies, but not quite. Those are dealt with in another volume. There are ways to tell if a selkie skin is an actual skin, or if it is a manufactured skin. An actual skin will be warm, even when the owner is not holding it or has not worn it for a long time. A manufactured skin will carry a slight throbbing, in time with the flow of waves and tide, and more pronounced the closer the moon is to full. Passing of the skin. A skin can be borrowed. Conditions leading to this may be 1. For healing of severe sickness. 2. Prevention of drowning, very rarely used and leaves the owner at risk unless they are on land. Usually a willing wife will loan her skin to a seafaring husband. Does not turn out well for the borrower if they lie with another woman or man while they are gone. 3. The owner having made a mistake great enough that all of their assets could be at the borrower's disposal if asked, also rare to see. 4. Conquest. A bull selkie can establish domination over another one of the herd, pod, or clan by taking and wearing the skin. 5. Compatibility between the borrower and the owner. 6. Relation. Consent is not always required. A skin can be stolen, which seems to fall under the conquest bracket of transference. Hence, part of why a selkie maid may be forced to marry and lie with any man that has stolen her skin. If a skin is stolen, that does not necessarily mean that a human will be able to use it. A skin may try to fight back if worn. Conversely, it might also decide that it likes someone enough to not want to come off well. Such people usually already are some sort of shifter, or already have a close connection with either the sea or someone bound to it. Consent, if given, does make it much easier for a skin to be used by another, most especially true if it is a manufactured skin. Some skins develop consciousness of their own, and can impart knowledge and converse. Some have quests of their own, or debts to fulfill. The earning of the skin. In order to hold a place on council and be a full member of a tribe, clan, or herd, it is necessary to possess a skin. Those born without one must earn or obtain one. The most respected way is to earn it from one or both goddesses. This is often in conjunction with the test of man or womanhood, a state that the Selkie people acknowledge earlier in some ways than those that live on the land, due to the differences in lifestyles. The test varies depending on the group. Some are expected to be better hunters, others have to swim sweeping migrations and survive. Each test is attended by Mara, and she ensures that it is harder than normal, so as to test strengths. One preparing to earn their skin must be well versed in the ways of their people. They should have good knowledge of the sea's mysteries, and be well grounded in who they are. They must have a firm sense of their own life path. If they do not know themselves, nor what they plan to do, then it is a sure way to be distracted enough to fail. They must also be prepared on how to defend themselves, and be clever. From the information I have collected from the few that have had to earn a skin, it seems to involve swimming far from the coastline. There is mention of the graveyard of whales, and of the most ancient Mara temple. I have heard stories of exploring wrecked ships, or undersea caves. All agree that at the end a giving of blood is required, and of allowing Mara to devour the seeker in order to be reborn, and of obtaining the skin from a particular stone box. Test of manhood. The males at the cusp of manhood gather together when the whales run with the fish. Together they must find one of the pods of narwhals, trekking to where those live, and thus among them find the sea unicorns. Sometimes Mara will send a pod specifically for testing to an area that for one reason or another she does not want leaving their own territory. Once found, the king of the pod must be singled out and brought down. The king is a fierce fighter, and if one survives armed only with a spear and small net, then is able to help bring the evidence home, they are considered both hunter and man. The bones are reserved for Lady Mara, for she uses these to rebirth her favorites, but the meat may be eaten. The horn, all or portion, may or may not be given. The net and spear are important. They were given the Selkie because not all of them were to possess the use of magic. Mara considers it more honorable to use these tools than to bring down her children with the use of poison claws, which taint the meat and blubber, thus taking from the people's sustenance. Magic, or the electrical charge that she has gifted to some bloodlines. These are sacred creatures to her, and so the sea unicorn is only killed for the manhood hunter test, or in times of dire straits. Normally it is only the males that undergo this test, though some females have been known to take this. It is no loss of status if a woman fails this. However, among the males there is a loss of status. To fail means that there is no chance to wed, or have a say in herd happenings. They are considered a boy forever, should they live, or until they have completed some other task that can prove beyond doubt that they are fit to pass on their seed, and to influence the family beyond pup-sitting. Test of womanhood. The women among the Selkie folk likewise must be tested before they are considered eligible to wed, though not breeding before passing is much harder to regulate. Females are expected to be well versed in weaving, sewing, spinning, and other resource processing, save for point and blade making. That is to be the realm of the males. A female must be able to process the food that her mate brings for the children to consume, when all are not living as seals, which some indeed do. Some few will be gifted in other endeavors, such as teaching, recording. All Selkie females are expected to be proficient singers or musicians. The feminine realm is the realm of creation and birth. Therefore she must be able to create from her soul a project that pleases Mara. Every project is different. A badly created item damages the soul and shortens the artisan's lifespan. It is also considered an affront to the gift of creative ability that Mara and the lady gave to their children. If a Selkie maid does not possess a sealskin of her own, then this test is often combined with her skin quest. I have heard fragmentary stories wherein the aspiring one thus has to create the project that will join her divided soul in order to receive herself. This is always done in a dark room within a cave below the sea floor, which the sea unicorn herds the Selkie maid into if he is not killed first. If she is successful and survives, she is treated as a woman among her people, even if other societies will still think her a child, for they may grow at a different rate, mentally and physically. The woman may now assist in the birthing process as a midwife, and help fend off those that always come to snatch at births. As for a long time, the women have been vulnerable while birthing, and unable to defend themselves and their children from attackers, whether human, fey, animal, fenmen, or worse. "How much more is left to read, Kirsten?" her aunt asked, while Kirsty paused to down another cup of tea. Her voice had begun to rasp rather uncomfortably. "A section after this. I've not thumbed much further. It looks like more, though. Copy everything out before you read that last." "Why?" "Just to be safe." Professor McLoman smiled wearily. "There were many blank pages when Arter and myself tried to read it, and while you have been reading, the book actually looks like it has grown thicker." Kirsty looked to the headmaster, and he nodded in confirmation. "It is a strange thing to see, even for one as old as I." "All right, then," she agreed, closing the book softly. "Should I head to my dorm, then?" "Yes. The only time I want you out in the common room is when you're doing homework. I'm afraid it will be at least a couple of weeks before you can go sit by the lock with David between classes. I want you where you can conceivably be watched." "Yes, Professor," she nodded, grimacing. "May I at least go sit by one of the fountains while I'm confined to the castle itself?" "You may, but only an hour or two, so that you'll get your water time." "As you wish." Kirsty wrapped the book and held it close. "Thank you, both of you, for not expelling me. Don't think you're out of the woods yet. There will still be your parents to reckon with." Professor McLoman looked at her niece over her glasses. Kirsty groaned, and then hurried upstairs. Castle Carrick, December 20. Kirsty flexed her fingers and grimaced before getting up from her desk and walking to her trunk. She fumbled the lid open and rummaged for the box where she kept her potions and unguents, then opened the mini chest. With effort she withdrew a small jar from one of the labeled nooks, then checked the label on the jar itself to be doubly sure. A few twists later she was rubbing sweet relief on her throbbing and stuck fingers. Happily she flexed again, her fingers moving much more easily, and finally beginning to stop screaming their retribution. "Well, Father, you certainly use a lot of words. I still wonder where your abbey was, and whether you were a selkie, or just someone that was fascinated by them," she whispered, and brought the jar with her to the desk, waiting for what she had already rubbed into her skin to fully absorb, so that she could safely return to her work. As she expected, the book didn't answer her. It laid open with the pages staring up, and when her hands were dry, she returned to reading. Every line she copied out what she read, both how it read and as she saw it, just in case. In case of what, though? It's a book. Care of the skin. The skin must receive special care. While worn, it must be groomed fastidiously and often, cleaned, and then having air blown into the fur in many cases. When removed, it must be oiled inside and outside. There are several types of oil that are acceptable, but the best is a mixture of oils, blubbers, and ambergris, and plants known to the healers among the selkie folk. The producing of this is only taught to those that aspire to the role. Special songs are taught to children since young, that aid in the care and healing of the skins. If damaged, a sealskin must be tended to as swiftly as possible, to minimize the damage and speed the healing. Otherwise the skin will scar or not heal, and a scarred skin does not grow fur properly, which lets in the cold of the sea, and lessens the time a selkie can comfortably dwell within it. Again, the healers are important here, as it is they that know how to prepare the unguents needed. A lone selkie must be able to have some contact with his or her people, in order to trade for such valuable resources. To destroy a skin is to destroy the soul of a selkie. Only rare occasions warrant this. If a selkie turns on his or her own kind and preys upon them for food, is an example of the drasticness. To destroy a skin while the selkie yet lives ties that fey to the mortal world, and once the body passes they cannot return to Mara's box to await rebirth, until the remains are found and given back. Most of the time the victim goes mad and drowns themselves in a desire to return home and reunite with the mothers. If there is need, to ensure that a skin is not completely destroyed so as to preserve its knowledge, Mara does allow for it, with her magic, to be sundered and tanned. This still binds the soul of the owner, but a vessel is also thus provided, and a vessel is needed for the soul to dwell in. Skins among some herds are laid to rest with their owners. Others keep the skins and continue to condition and oil them as if the owners still live, in the event that the original owner is reborn into the same group to reclaim it, and to preserve the knowledge it has gained. When this sort of birth occurs, the skin gives a sign, and so the selkie born at that time is not considered skinless, even if born in human guise. Kirsty painstakingly copied the last sentence, and then turned the page, looking for more. Every page after was blank, yet there were a great many pages. Not even diagrams, maps, drawings, or anything, she mused aloud. I was really hoping that there was more. It looks like there was supposed to be. Patience, child. When you're ready, I'll tell you more. Spread across the open page in a familiar ancient script. Oh, no, not one of these books, she moaned. Why didn't you tell me you could talk and think? You mumbled to me, But you never asked me." "Oh, so you can tell me who you were, then?" Kirsty leaned forward. "Later. Your hands need rest." "So when is later going to be? Sorry to be so tenacious, but I've been wondering a long time. Are you, or were you, Father Ronan?"
Her breath was coming fast, and she knew her eyes must be dilated, because things seemed brighter, even though the light hadn't changed.
"I was, and I am. But for now I want you to rest. See if your aunt will let you spend some time with that boy down by the fountain. So much writing is just as bad for the fingers in your day as it was in mine." "Well, could you tell me more about what you know about the skin trials? I don't have very many more months before I start the first. I don't know what I'm up against." "I can tell you what I know of ones I have heard of in my lifetime, that half-selkies have done to become full. Each is different, though. Mara, at the very least, will customize hers. I have little knowledge of what happens in the ladies. For now, though, go forth and enjoy the lad's company. Youth flies too quickly."
The writing faded, and Kirsty closed the book thoughtfully.
"I see. So I can prepare all I like, but there are no guarantees that anything I learn will be of use,"
she murmured to herself, just as much as to Father Ronan.
"I think I will go have some time with David. I've not been spending as much time with him."
She wrapped the book carefully and put it in her trunk with her green leathery diary that was linked to the Makay log. Patting the pouch at her waist, she ensured that the twin vials were still with her, and then she left to go find David, very likely in the potions classroom. This has been a THG Star Dragon Publishing production of Pearls of Sea and Stone, Book of Seals, a Selkies Skins story, written by Teresa Garcia, narrated by Illya Leonov, music by Zepp Hurme. Copyright 2014 by Teresa Garcia. Production copyright 2015 by THG Star Dragon Publishing.